Hi, I'm Miles and this is Autominded. We're going to be talking about a good bit in this video. It's going to be things like the largest automotive recall that never happened. We're going to talk about what you can get for good auto labor relations. It's going to be prostitution, even secret factory watering holes, and if there's a little bit of time, we'll also get into some reading. And because we're talking about so much, we got to wind the clock pretty far back. In fact, we're almost going back to the beginning. Talking about 1913. This is when Henry Ford put in the assembly line, and this was really great for making cars, but the work was just so tedious that, well, he was losing workers just as fast as he could get them. And he couldn't change the nature of the work, and so the idea was just to throw money at the problem. That's why he basically doubled everybody's salary and announced the $5 workday. But despite the headline, it just really wasn't as simple as you show up to work and they hand you a crisp $5. Instead, it was a bit more complicated. You really only got about half of it up front. That other half was going to be paid to you as a bonus, and that was only after you met virtue standards set by Ford, both for in the factory and even in your own home. And, well, after a few years, that whole home invasion idea did kind of subside, but they really did set a precedent there where they decided that if they paid you a higher wage, they really had the right to run your life. And that didn't sit well with people, and well, it all kind of came to head in the 1930s. That's when unions started coming into the factories and sort of giving the workers their rights. And, well, this video really isn't about talking about the birth of the unions, but it's a very important part of American history. So if you don't already know about it, it's worth doing some outside reading. Really, the only reason why I bring this up is because it gives you a good baseline as we move the timeline forward a little bit, because as we get outside of World War II, America's industrial might, it really focuses on auto production. So we still can't solve that assembly line problem of boredom and just keep throwing money at it. But well, now you know you got one side, you've got labor and union on one side and management on the other. And in the middle is actually making a product. But they keep fortifying that wall, a little bit more pay, a little bit more work, better defined the work hours. And well, it just keeps building and building. And that takes us through the 50s and the 60s. But then we get in the 1970s and everything really starts to change because, well, we're really starting to see outside factors that never affected us before. Things like multiple gas crises, a real huge influx of imports, and, well, there were just new safety regulations that were really hurting production. And this was such a turbulent time, it was such a different time, it was something that really put us all in jeopardy for the first time, really since we were making cars. And so, to really help document that was Bob Dewar, and this comes from his book, A Savage Factory. Dewar joined a Ford transmission plant in Ohio when times were still good, and you knew that because he left another executive position to come to Ford specifically because they paid the best salaries in town. And even though he's actually an executive, he was a foreman, and what a foreman means is that you're on the line, you're on the factory floor, except you're just not standing up and riveting things, you're sitting behind a desk. And so he was kind of the front line there between the hourly union workers and the upper levels of management. And what that really meant is he had a front row seat to this war of attrition that was going on because, well, they really didn't care if they were making anything. They could have been making widgets for all they cared. The product didn't matter. What just mattered is that one side was always watching the other, and whoever stepped over the line, they made sure that person got reprimanded. When the job itself is that unsatisfying, well, it also makes for some interesting side stories, and that's part of the fun of what Dewar gets into here because, well, he tells some cool tales. Good example is a woman named Grace. Grace had a very difficult job because what she did was she filled in for people who were absent all around the plant, and so she was doing all sorts of different manufacturing jobs during the day, and most people would complain about that, but Grace really liked it. And well, Dewar found out about why later because, well, then he found her RV that was permanently parked in the employee parking lot where she provided plenty of comfort to the workers that she met along the way. Another good illegal business was, well, a bar in the middle of the factory. And I'm just not talking about somebody who maybe set up a little bit of a cooler. I'm talking about behind a wall of pallets, there was a genuine bar. We're talking about stools, a cash register, tables. In today's world, basically, they probably would have had a food truck back there. And the funny thing about it is, as much as that was behind rejected parts in a pallet, well, rejected parts were actually hard to come by because if Dewar rejected parts when he was working on the day shift, he never really saw them again. He thought that's where those pallets were going. But he started noticing, he got on the night shift, and all of a sudden, that's where he saw those rejected parts go into production and even go into Ford cars. And that last one really helped contribute to the quality problem that a lot of automotive companies had in the 1970s. And, well, Ford did an interesting thing, and they used this guy to help rebuild their reputation.
Engine technology, all to help minimize rough idling in engines that go into Ford, Mercury, and Lincoln cars.
From today's perspective, it's pretty funny to actually ask Bill Cosby to lend you some of his integrity, but one of those commercials they actually did, that was also at Dewar's factory, and so you got a really cool story in here about how they had to scrub the place down pretty good and get rid of all the toxic air that everybody else had to breathe just so that Cosby could have maybe just one little corner so it looked like he was at a real transmission plant. And I've seen a lot of those Bill Cosby Ford commercials, but I haven't seen this one. So if you find it out there on the internet, please put in the comments, because that's going to be a fun one to watch. And that's what's really nice about this book, is it just has a lot of really fun behind the scenes stories. But one thing that's always going on, one underlying theme, is that Dewar's struggling with the understanding that he knows he's putting bad quality out on the road. The problem is there's really just nothing he can do about it, because it's that line between union and management, because if either one of them gets out of line, you know they're going to be clipped, and so he just has to walk that line and make his numbers. But, well, the really funny thing is his struggle was all for naught, because he was really damned from the beginning. As it turns out, every one of those transmissions he made as his 6 years at that factory, they were eventually declared all defective. A recall of that size would have bankrupted Ford. So instead they negotiated sending this sticker to 23 million customers so that they could install them on their dashboards. In this video, we've really just been talking about Ford, and that's because Ford was there at the beginning and Dewar only worked at a Ford factory in Ohio. But in the era of a savage factory, well, pretty much all American auto manufacturers were guilty of the same ideas. So in fact, Dewar's experience wasn't that unique. What was unique is that he really did document that changing era, and he did document that change using amusing stories. Plus, right now it still feels kind of pertinent because, well, American manufacturing is going through another era of change. Electric cars are going to mean a whole different idea of labor, and well, also the tariffs are bringing in a whole different idea on components. And so, all of a sudden, a book that's nearly 20 years old and has stories that come from about 50 years ago, well, it's starting to feel a bit more relevant again, isn't it? Thank you for watching.